She was forced by her family to marry her sister's millionaire fiancé in Coma. Unbelievable happened. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It all started on a cold and quiet morning inside the private suite of St. James Medical Center. The faint sound of monitors echoed through the hall, a slow and steady rhythm that matched the beating in Lily Hart's chest. She stood by the window, her trembling hands clutching a bouquet of white lilies. They were not hers to hold. They belonged to her sister. Only 3 hours earlier, Lily had been crying in the church's empty dressing room, still wearing her sister's wedding gown. Evelyn had run away, leaving behind her veil, her vows, and her fiancé, Adrian Hayes, the youngest billionaire in the city, now lying unconscious in a hospital bed after a near-fatal car crash. "Lily," her mother had said in a trembling voice, "if you do not take her place, our family will lose everything. The contract with the Hayes Group will collapse. Your father's debts will destroy us." The words still echoed in Lily's head as she walked down the sterile hallway, the train of the white gown whispering against the polished floor. The bouquet shook in her grip. She had never imagined her wedding day would smell like antiseptic instead of roses, that her groom would not stand beside her, but lie motionless under machines. Inside the room, the air felt frozen. Adrian Hayes, 32 years old, once the face of innovation and power, was now a pale shadow surrounded by wires and tubes. His breathing machine hummed softly, the only sign he was still alive. The priest stood awkwardly near the bed, his voice low but steady. "Do you, Lily Hart, take Adrian Hayes to be your lawful husband?" Her throat tightened. She looked at Adrian's still face, the sharp jawline, the faint bruises fading along his temple. She whispered, "I do." A single tear rolled down her cheek as she slid the ring onto his finger. The metal was cold, lifeless, yet somehow heavier than any weight she had ever carried. When the ceremony ended, her father signed the papers with a shaking hand, sealing the marriage that was never meant to be. Cameras flashed outside the corridor. Reporters whispered about the poor substitute bride who married a man in a coma. As the door closed behind them, Lily stayed by the bedside. She touched Adrian's hand gently, her voice barely a breath. "I do not know if you can hear me, but I promise I will take care of you until you wake up." The heart monitor beeped once, a soft, uneven sound just enough to make her heart skip. She did not know if it was coincidence or fate. But for the first time since that morning, Lily felt something stir in the silence, the beginning of something neither contract nor duty could control. The sun had not yet risen when Lily Hart left the hospital that morning. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, and the hem of her borrowed wedding gown was soaked from the cold mist that rolled through the parking lot. The vows, the ring, the press flashes, all of it felt like a fever dream she could not wake from. She was now legally Mrs. Adrian Hayes, though her husband had not opened his eyes. In the back seat of the black car waiting for her, the driver, a man in a dark uniform, did not speak. Through the window, Lily watched the city blur past. She had no idea where she was being taken until the iron gates appeared tall, silver, and guarded by stone lions. Beyond them rose the Hayes estate, a mansion that looked less like a home and more like a monument to silence. The doors opened without sound. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cedar and polished marble. Chandeliers glimmered above her like a frozen constellation. Portraits of the Hayes family lined the corridor, their painted eyes following her every step. A woman in a gray uniform appeared, Mrs. Collier, the head housekeeper. Her hair was pinned tight, her tone clipped. "Welcome, Mrs. Hayes," she said with professional detachment. "The master bedroom is prepared. Mr. Adrian's medical suite remains at St. James Hospital for now. You will occupy the west wing." Lily's throat tightened. She wanted to correct her, to say she was not truly Mrs. Hayes. But the words would not come. She simply nodded. "Mrs." Collier continued, "Mr. Nathan Hayes, the younger brother, will arrive later. He manages the household in Mr. Adrian's absence. Breakfast is served at 8. Staff meetings are on Mondays." When the housekeeper turned away, Lily exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every word. She was not just in a stranger's home. She was in a world that had already judged her. In her assigned room, the walls were pale ivory, the bed larger than her entire apartment back home. On the nightstand lay a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter typed on expensive paper. For the duration of this marriage, you will remain within the estate or accompany medical staff to the hospital. You will uphold the public image of Mrs. Adrian Hayes. Discretion is expected. Compensation will be arranged monthly. There was no signature, only the embossed Hayes insignia at the bottom. Lily stared at the letter until her vision blurred. It was not a marriage, it was an extension of a business deal. She folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope. For a long time, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. They still smelled faintly of antiseptic and the lilies from the hospital. At 8 o'clock sharp, she made her way to the dining room. The table could have seated 20 people, but only one chair was occupied. Nathan Hayes. He was younger than Adrian by a few years, sharp-featured, well-dressed, and entirely composed. His eyes, gray and cold, studied her as she entered. "So," he said finally, setting down his coffee cup, "you are the substitute bride." Lily froze. The words hit harder than she expected. "I did what my family asked me to do," she said quietly. Nathan leaned back. "And what your family asked just happened to make you Mrs. Hayes, quite the coincidence." 1. "I did not marry him for money," she said, her voice trembling. He smiled without warmth. "Of course not. Every woman who says that means exactly the opposite." Before she could reply, Mrs. Collier entered to clear the plates. Nathan stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "Enjoy your new life, Mrs. Hayes. This house has plenty of rules. You will learn them soon enough." Then he walked out, leaving the faint scent of cologne and distrust behind. Lily remained alone in the vast room, surrounded by silver and silence. Her breakfast sat untouched. She felt smaller than ever, a ghost wearing a borrowed name. That afternoon, she walked through the garden to clear her head. The winter air was sharp but clean, carrying the faint hum of the city beyond the gates. She found a small greenhouse at the far end of the property, half forgotten, its glass panes fogged with dust. Inside, she discovered rows of dying orchids, their petals curling inward. A watering can sat abandoned beside them. She knelt and touched the soil. It was dry and brittle. "You are still alive," she whispered. She found a hose, turned on the water, and began to clean the leaves gently. She did not know why she was doing it, only that she needed to feel useful again, to care for something that might respond. When she returned to the main hall, Mrs. Collier met her with a surprised frown. "The greenhouse has been closed for years," the woman said. "I thought maybe it did not have to be," Lily answered softly. For the first time, the housekeeper's expression softened by a fraction. "You may do as you wish, Mrs. Hayes. Just do not expect gratitude from this house." That evening, Lily sat in her room, reading a file sent from the hospital. She had requested updates on Adrian's condition. The report was unchanged. Stable. No neurological progress. She placed the file beside her wedding ring on the nightstand. The ring caught the lamplight, throwing a faint reflection on the wall like a silent reminder of the vow she had spoken to a man who could not hear her. Outside, the mansion stood still under the pale moonlight. Somewhere deep inside, she thought she heard the echo of that hospital monitor, a faint, rhythmic beeping that existed only in her memory. In that lonely rhythm, Lily made a quiet decision. If her marriage had begun as a contract, she would turn it into something real, even if she had to do it alone. And as she closed her eyes, the wind brushed through the open window, carrying the faint scent of lilies, a sign that maybe, somewhere far away, Adrian Hayes was still listening. The following morning, the sound of rain against the glass pulled Lily's heart from a restless sleep. The sky outside the Hayes mansion was gray, heavy, and still. She sat up, feeling the chill in the air, and for a moment forgot where she was. Then she saw the letter on the nightstand and the wedding ring beside it, and reality returned like a slow ache. Downstairs, the house felt too large for the sound of a single pair of footsteps. The maids moved quietly, avoiding her eyes. She caught fragments of whispered words: "The substitute bride," "The girl from nowhere," "He will never wake," each one cut deeper than the last. At the breakfast table, Mrs. Collier appeared again, her posture impeccable, her tone formal. "Mr. Nathan Hayes has gone to the office," she informed. "The hospital called this morning. Mr. Adrian's condition remains stable. The nurses appreciate your visits. I will have the driver ready at 10 if you wish to go." Lily nodded. "Thank you." 2 hours later, she sat in the back of the same black car that had brought her to the mansion. The world outside was a blur of rain and steel. The closer they came to Street, James Medical Center, the faster her heart began to beat. Inside the private suite, everything was the same as before: the soft rhythm of the heart monitor, the steady hum of the machines, the quiet pulse of life holding on. Adrian Hayes lay motionless, his skin pale, his breathing calm. Lily stood beside his bed, feeling both stranger and wife. She poured fresh water into the vase beside him, replacing the wilted lilies with new ones she had bought on the way. "You probably hate lilies by now," she whispered with a sad smile. "But they were the only thing I could afford before all this happened." Her hands moved automatically, straightening his blanket, wiping the condensation from his oxygen mask, checking the chart even though she barely understood the medical codes. "You look stronger today," she said softly. "Or maybe I am just hoping too much." A nurse entered the room quietly, a kind woman in her 50s. "Mrs. Hayes," she greeted with genuine warmth. "You are back again. He is lucky to have you." Lily hesitated. "I am not sure he is lucky. I was not supposed to be here." The nurse smiled gently. "Maybe you were. Sometimes life replaces people for a reason." She adjusted the monitor and left, leaving Lily alone again. She sat down beside the bed, tracing the edge of his hand with her fingers. The silence stretched. "Do you know, Adrian?" she whispered. "Your brother does not believe me. Your family does not even look at me. But I made a promise to you, even if you never hear it. I will keep it." The monitor beeped steadily, unchanging, as if answering her vow with patience. When she returned to the mansion that evening, Nathan was waiting in the foyer. He stood with a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression unreadable. "The dutiful wife returns," he said. "Tell me, Mrs. Hayes, does talking to a man in a coma make you feel better about yourself?" Lily froze. "It makes me feel human," she replied quietly. Nathan took a slow sip of his drink. "You know what I think? You are hoping he never wakes up, because the moment he does, you lose everything: the house, the title, the little act of kindness that makes you feel noble." Her voice trembled but did not break. "I never asked for any of this," he smiled without mirth. "No one ever does. Yet somehow, they all manage to keep what they gain." Then he walked away, leaving the echo of his footsteps hanging in the marble hall. That night, Lily wandered into the greenhouse again. The rain had stopped, and moonlight filtered through the fogged glass. The orchids she had watered were still weak but alive. She knelt among them, brushing away the dust from the wooden labels. Each one bore a name. When she reached the last pot, she froze. It read, "Lily Adrian's favorite." She stared at the small tag, the handwriting faded but clear. It was his greenhouse. These flowers had been his. She traced the letters slowly, her throat tightening. For the first time since the wedding, she felt a connection that was real, fragile, but real. She stayed there for hours, her hands in the soil, the air filled with the faint scent of life returning. When the wind shifted, it carried the distant sound of thunder, or maybe memory from the city below. Back in her room, she found another envelope waiting on her pillow. It bore no name, only the Hayes seal. Inside, a single line was typed. "Appearances must be maintained. Do not visit the hospital without approval." No signature again, no warmth, just a command. Lily folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the first letter. The mansion was dark except for the faint glow of her bedside lamp. She sat there for a long time, looking at the reflection of her own face in the window. She whispered to the darkness, "You can write all the rules you want, but you cannot tell me not to care." Outside, lightning flashed across the distant horizon, illuminating the edges of the estate. In that brief light, her reflection overlapped with the image of her wedding ring on the glass, a symbol of a promise that had started as duty but was slowly becoming something that could not be written in any contract. And somewhere, miles away, in the quiet of the hospital room, the heart monitor beside Adrian Hayes flickered a single, stronger beat, breaking the pattern of steady rhythm, as if something deep inside had heard her words and was trying, in silence, to answer. Rain softened into mist over the Hayes estate as another day began. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar, and the sound of dripping water echoed faintly from the marble balconies. Lily Hart awoke before dawn again. She had stopped counting the days since the wedding, but the quiet routine of the mansion had already become both her prison and her shelter. Each morning she visited the greenhouse before anyone else was awake. The orchids she had revived were beginning to bloom again, fragile petals opening like soft whispers. It was the only place in the estate that responded to her touch, the only corner where she could breathe without fear of judgment. That morning, while watering the last row, she heard footsteps on the gravel outside. The greenhouse door opened, and Nathan Hayes stepped in. His tailored coat was untouched by rain, and his polished shoes gleamed under the faint light. "So this is where you hide," he said, his tone sharp but curious. "I am not hiding," Lily answered, keeping her eyes on the flowers. "I am tending to something that is alive." Nathan gave a cold laugh. "You should remember, Mrs. Hayes, everything on this property belongs to my brother, including those flowers." "They were dying," she replied softly. "Someone had to care for them." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Do not waste your effort. Nothing here changes. My brother built this house to last without love. He did not believe in it." She turned to face him. "Then maybe that is why he is still sleeping." "Oh." For a brief second, something flickered behind Nathan's eyes, surprise, maybe even anger, but he said nothing. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and left, his cologne lingering in the air long after the door closed. Later that day, Lily was called to the study. Mrs. Collier stood near the doorway, her face unreadable. "Mr. Nathan wishes to see you," she said. Inside, the study was a world of polished oak and shadow. Nathan sat behind Adrian's old desk, papers spread neatly before him. A cup of untouched coffee steamed beside a stack of financial reports. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." Lily obeyed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Nathan opened a folder and slid it across the desk. "These are photographs from the hospital. You have been visiting without approval, despite clear instructions not to." She felt the color drain from her face. "He is my husband. I'm not hurting anyone." "You are hurting our reputation," he snapped. "Reporters are beginning to notice. They are questioning why the new Mrs. Hayes spends her days whispering to a man who may never wake up. It looks desperate." Her voice shook, but she did not look away. "Maybe it is, but I will not stop." Nathan leaned back, studying her. "You are either foolish or very brave. I have not decided which." "I do not care what you decide," she said quietly. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and unyielding. Then Nathan's tone changed, almost thoughtful. "Do you even know why my brother was in that car accident?" Lily hesitated. "They said it was brake failure." He smiled faintly, but the smile never reached his eyes. "That is what the papers said. The truth is messier." Before she could ask more, he closed the folder. "Forget it. Curiosity is a dangerous habit here." The meeting ended, but the questions stayed with her long after she left the study. That night, as she walked through the dim corridors, she could not stop hearing his words. The truth is messier. The next morning, she returned to the hospital again, ignoring the warning. The nurses welcomed her kindly, as always. Adrian lay in the same position, his expression calm, his body strong but motionless. She sat beside him and began to talk, as she did every visit. "They say the truth is messy, Adrian," she whispered. "But maybe it is also the only thing worth finding." "Oh." Her fingers brushed against his hand. For a heartbeat, she thought she felt warmth, the faintest motion beneath his skin. She froze, watching the monitor. The rhythm was steady, unchanged. Maybe she had imagined it. Still, she smiled. "I will keep talking," she said softly, "until you answer me." When she returned home that evening, the mansion was alive with unexpected movement. Cameras and floral arrangements filled the grand hall. Mrs. Collier rushed past with a clipboard, murmuring about seating charts and catering. "What is happening?" Lily asked. Mrs. Collier paused. "A press event, the Hayes Foundation Gala. It was scheduled before the accident. Mr. Nathan decided to proceed. He said it will show stability." Lily's heart sank. "And what am I supposed to do?" "You will attend," Mrs. Collier replied. "You are Mrs. Hayes, after all. The public must see the image of devotion." Our meeting that evening, The mansion transformed into a theater of wealth. Crystal glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and guests murmured polite curiosity about the absent groom. Lily wore a simple silver gown provided by the staff. It shimmered under the chandeliers, but felt heavy on her shoulders. When she entered the ballroom, conversation quieted for a second. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some sympathetic, most skeptical. She walked slowly to the center, her heart pounding. Nathan appeared beside her, perfectly composed, his hand resting lightly on her elbow for the cameras. "Smile," he murmured. "They need to believe this is a love story." She forced a small smile, her gaze distant. In the crowd of glittering faces, she thought of the hospital room, of the soft beep of the monitor that had become her only real music. While photographers snapped their pictures, Nathan whispered again, almost inaudible, "Do not forget, Mrs. Hayes, every performance has its price." And though she smiled for the flash of the cameras, deep down Lily knew the stage they stood on was far from stable. Somewhere beyond the mansion walls, the truth Nathan refused to speak was already beginning to stir, and the illusion of their perfect life would not last forever. The morning after the gala, the Hayes mansion was quiet again. The chandeliers had gone dark, the marble floors had been polished back to their perfect shine, and the scent of expensive perfume still lingered faintly in the halls. For everyone else, the night had been a success. The photographs on the society pages showed Nathan Hayes smiling beside the elegant new Mrs. Hayes, his hand resting lightly at her back. To the world, the Hayes empire had never looked stronger. But for Lily Hart, that evening had felt like walking through fire and silk. Every compliment, every camera flash, every polite smile had been another reminder that she was only playing a part. Behind the elegant facade, she was still the girl who had promised to care for a man who might never wake. She sat in the library that morning, staring out the tall windows as light filtered through the mist. A stack of newspapers lay on the table beside her. One headline read, "The Sleeping Billionaire and His Beautiful Bride." Her photograph filled half the page. Beneath it, a smaller caption read, "A Marriage Born from Tragedy, or Something More." Her hands tightened on the edge of the paper until it tore. She folded it quickly and hid it in the drawer. Mrs. Collier entered a moment later, carrying a breakfast tray. "You did well last night," the housekeeper said, her tone carefully neutral. The board members were impressed. "Mr. Nathan believes the press will settle for now." Lily nodded faintly. It did not feel like success. Success rarely does when it costs something real," Mrs. Collier replied, setting down the tray. Her eyes softened. "You may want to visit the hospital today. The staff said Mr. Adrian's readings have changed slightly." Lily froze. "Changed? How?" "They did not say," the woman answered, "only that it is worth seeing." 2 hours later, Lily stood once more at Adrian's bedside. The morning light poured through the blinds, painting his face in pale gold. The monitors still beeped in their calm rhythm, but there was something different about the air in the room, a subtle energy, a warmth she could not explain. The nurse smiled as she entered. "He twitched this morning," she said quietly. "Just his fingers, but still. The doctor says it could be reflex, or maybe something more." Lily moved closer, her pulse quickening. She reached out and touched his hand. "Adrian," she whispered, "if you can hear me, you do not have to rush. Just keep fighting." Her thumb brushed the back of his palm, and for an instant, his fingers tightened around hers. Not much, barely emotion at all, but enough to make her gasp. The nurse turned, startled. "Did you see that?" Lily whispered. The nurse nodded slowly. "Yes. It could be nothing, but keep talking to him. It seems to help." For the rest of the day, Lily stayed by his side. She read aloud from the newspaper, skipping the cruel headlines. She told him about the greenhouse, about the flowers blooming again, about how the world outside still moved even when people stopped believing in miracles. Each time she paused, she thought she saw the faintest reaction in his expression, the smallest flicker beneath his eyelids, like a dream trying to surface. When evening came, she returned to the mansion, exhausted but filled with a strange lightness. She wanted to tell someone, but there was no one she trusted. Nathan would only twist her words into mockery, and the staff would not believe her. So she kept the secret inside her chest, glowing quietly like a candle. At dinner, Nathan joined her at the long table, a glass of red wine in his hand. "You seem different," he said, watching her carefully. Did something happen at the hospital? She hesitated, then shook her head. No, nothing important. He smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed sharp. Good. Let us hope you remember that nothing is important unless I say so. After dinner, she walked alone through the dim corridor leading to the west wing. As she passed Adrian's study, she noticed the door slightly ajar. The room had been left untouched since the accident, a frozen monument to the man he once was. She pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. The scent of old books and cedar filled the air. Papers still covered the desk, notes written in Adrian's strong, precise handwriting. A silver pen lay across an open journal. She hesitated, then turned a page. It was dated 2 days before the crash. The entry read, "I have begun to suspect the numbers do not match. Someone within the company is falsifying accounts. If anything happens to me, the evidence is in the second safe." Lily's heart pounded. She scanned the desk, then found a hidden panel in the wall behind it. A safe was built into the wood. She tried the combination that was scribbled in the margin, the date of the Hayes Foundation's founding, and heard a soft click. Inside were files, photographs, and a small flash drive. She glanced at the first page and froze. It was a financial report bearing Nathan Hayes' signature. The numbers had been altered not once, but repeatedly. Before she could take another look, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. She quickly closed the safe and stepped back just as the door opened. Nathan stood there, his expression polite but his eyes sharp as glass. "Exploring Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. "I was just looking for something to read," she said evenly. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You are curious. That can be dangerous." His gaze drifted toward the desk, and for a moment she thought he knew exactly what she had seen. Then he stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "Good night, Mrs. Hayes." Well, she left the study, her heart racing. Once inside her room, she locked the door and pressed her back against it. On her palms, she could still feel the weight of the papers she had touched. Now she understood. Adrian's accident had not been an accident at all, and if Nathan had something to hide, then the moment Adrian Hayes woke up, if he truly could, everything inside that mansion would change forever. Lily Hart did not sleep that night. The shadows in her room felt heavier than usual, pressing against the walls like unspoken secrets. She sat on the edge of her bed, the dim lamplight painting her hands gold as she replayed every moment from the study in her mind. The file, the handwriting, the altered numbers, it was all too real. And Nathan Hayes' sudden appearance at the door had not been coincidence. He had been watching her. When morning came, she dressed quietly and went to the greenhouse. The air inside was cool and damp, the orchids glistening with dew. She knelt among them, breathing deeply, trying to calm the pounding in her chest. But peace no longer lived in that house. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the staff felt like a warning. Mrs. Collier appeared at the entrance. "Mrs. Hayes," she said softly, "Mr. Nathan wishes to see you in the drawing room." Lily's pulse jumped. "Now?" "Yes, immediately." The walk through the corridor felt endless. When she entered the drawing room, Nathan stood by the window, his back to her. The morning light framed his silhouette, sharp and immaculate. On the table beside him sat a folder the same color and size as the one she had seen in Adrian's study. "Good morning," he said without turning. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "You have been busy lately." Lily froze. "I do not understand." "Do not lie," he said, finally turning to face her. His gray eyes were colder than the marble beneath their feet. "You went into my brother's study. You opened his safe. You took something." "I did not take anything," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling. He stepped closer. "Then tell me, what exactly were you looking for?" "I was trying to understand," she whispered. "He almost died, Nathan. Someone wanted him gone. If you truly care about your brother, you should want to know who did it." Nathan's expression did not change. "Be careful, Mrs. Hayes. Curiosity can destroy people faster than greed." She met his gaze. "Or maybe it exposes it." For a brief second, silence hung between them like a drawn blade. Then Nathan smiled, slow, practiced, and entirely without warmth. "You are bold. I will give you that. But remember, in this house, power is not taken. It is inherited. You may play the devoted wife all you want, but do not mistake your title for protection." He left the room without another word. When he was gone, Lily sank into the nearest chair, her breath shaking. Her instincts were right, he knew. He was hiding something, and now he saw her as a threat. She had to be careful. That afternoon, she went to the hospital again. The nurse greeted her kindly as always, but there was tension in her smile. "You are being followed," she whispered. "One of the Hayes security men was here earlier, asking questions about your visits." Lily's heart sank. "Thank you for telling me," she said. She stepped into Adrian's room, closing the door behind her. The steady rhythm of the machines filled the air again, a strange comfort amidst the fear. She sat beside him and took his hand. "They are trying to silence the truth, Adrian," she said quietly. "But I found what you were looking for. I know now. You were not careless. Someone hurt you because you were getting too close to something they wanted hidden." The sunlight shifted across his face, soft and golden. For a moment, she thought she saw his eyelids flutter, but when she blinked, the motion was gone. Still, she kept speaking, her voice calm and certain. "I will protect what you built, even if they try to take everything away from me." Later that evening, as she returned to the mansion, a black car she did not recognize sat idling at the gates. Two men in suits stepped out, carrying briefcases. Mrs. Collier met them at the door. When Lily asked who they were, the housekeeper hesitated before answering. "They are auditors from the Hayes Foundation," she said. "Mr. Nathan called them. He says it is just routine, but I have never seen such tension in his face." Lily's stomach turned. Nathan was trying to erase the trail to make the documents she found meaningless. He was moving faster than she expected. That night, she went to the study again. The corridors were dark, and the only light came from the moon spilling through the tall windows. She moved quietly, her bare feet silent against the rug. The safe was locked again, but this time, she did not need it. She had memorized what she saw. The altered reports, the hidden accounts, the transactions that vanished into offshore numbers. She would not let them disappear again. A sound behind her made her freeze. She turned and saw Mrs. Collier standing in the doorway. "Mrs. Hayes," the housekeeper said, her voice low but not unkind. "You should not be here." "I have to find the truth," Lily said. "Adrian deserves that." The older woman's expression softened with something that looked like pity. "You are brave," she said. "But bravery can be lonely. I will say this once, be careful what you uncover. Not every truth will save you." Lily nodded slowly. "Then I will find the one that does." Mrs. Collier said nothing more. She simply turned and walked away, leaving Lily alone with the sound of her own heartbeat. Outside, thunder rumbled far off in the distance. Rain began to fall again, tapping against the windows like quiet knocks. She looked at Adrian's photograph on the desk, the one taken a year before the accident. His eyes in the picture seemed to look directly at her, calm and certain, as if urging her forward. She whispered into the silence, "I will not stop, Adrian. Not until you open your eyes and tell me yourself." And as the rain fell harder, somewhere across the city, the machines in Adrian Hayes's hospital room registered another faint change, a stronger pulse, one the nurses would notice by morning. The next morning began with a storm. The sky over the Hayes estate was a deep gray, and the wind rattled the windows like a warning. The house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves knew something was about to change. Lily Hart woke before dawn, her pulse already racing, her thoughts still tangled with the memory of what she had read in Adrian's files. She went to the window and watched the rain pour down the marble steps. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled through the hills. She thought of Adrian in that hospital bed, of the steady rhythm of the monitor beside him, and of the faint flicker she had seen in his fingers. Something inside her told her the time for silence was ending. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with quiet tension. Staff members moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. The auditors Nathan Hayes had brought in were still in the study, combing through boxes of papers. Lily could hear their voices, low and urgent, as she passed the door. Mrs. Collier appeared beside her, carrying a silver tray. "You should not be near that room today," the housekeeper said softly. "There is too much watching, too much listening." Lily nodded. "I understand." A blank, but she did not walk away. Instead, she paused at the edge of the hallway and looked through the slightly open door. Nathan stood by the window, his posture sharp, his tone clipped as he spoke to one of the auditors. "If there are irregularities," he said, "they end here. No questions go beyond this room." The man nodded quickly. Nathan turned, catching sight of Lily. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. His expression was unreadable, but his voice softened with false politeness. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "you are awake early. You must be bored, living among ledgers and silence." "I prefer honesty to noise," she said evenly. Nathan smiled faintly. "Be careful what you prefer. Honesty can be expensive." She left without another word. Later that morning, Lily went to the hospital again. The drive through the rain took longer than usual. The streets slick and shining. When she arrived, the nurse greeted her with visible excitement. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "you came just in time. There was movement again early this morning. His heartbeat spiked only for a few seconds, but it is progress." Lily felt her knees weaken. She moved to Adrian's bedside, her eyes filling as she saw the faint color returning to his face. "Adrian," she whispered, "I knew you could hear me." She sat down beside him, her hand resting gently on his. "I do not know if you remember what happened," she continued softly, "but they are trying to erase it. They think they can hide everything, even what they did to you. But I will not let them. Not while I am still here." The heart monitor beeped, steady but strong, as if answering her. Hours passed before she finally left the hospital. When she returned to the mansion, the storm had quieted, leaving behind a heavy stillness. The lamps were lit in the corridor, casting long golden shadows across the floor. Nathan was waiting for her in the main hall, a glass of wine in his hand. "You went to the hospital again," he said calmly, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "Yes," she replied. "He moved today." He gave a slow, deliberate smile. "Did he? Or do you just want to believe that?" "I saw it," she said. "I felt it." Nathan stepped closer, his voice low. "Do you know what happens if he wakes up, Mrs. Hayes? Everything changes. The contracts, the inheritance, the control, all of it. And you think you are ready for that?" Her voice did not shake. "Because I am not afraid of the truth." His smile vanished. "You should be." He turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps fading down the marble corridor. That night, Lily could not rest. The air in her room felt too still, too heavy. Around midnight, she went to the greenhouse again. The orchids had bloomed fully now, their petals pale and luminous under the moonlight. She knelt among them, her hands brushing the leaves as if drawing strength from the life they held. Behind her, the sound of the door opening broke the silence. She turned quickly, expecting Mrs. Collier, but instead, it was Nathan. He stepped inside slowly, his expression unreadable. "You come here often," he said. "You must find it peaceful." "It is the only place in this house that feels alive," she answered. He looked around, then met her gaze. "Do you really think you can fix something that has been broken for years?" "I do not know," she said honestly, "but I have to try." "Oh." For a moment, Nathan said nothing. Then, in a quieter tone, he asked, "What if the truth you are chasing destroys this family? Would you still call it justice?" "Yes," she said, "because justice does not come with conditions." The silence that followed was long and tense. Then Nathan took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and left without another word. When the door closed, Lily exhaled shakily. She looked down at the orchids again, her heart pounding. She knew that whatever Nathan was hiding, it was unraveling, and he knew that she was the thread pulling it loose. The next morning, as dawn broke over the city, the nurse at St. James Medical Center entered Adrian Hayes' room to check his vitals. For a brief, breathless moment, she froze. His hand had moved again, this time more clearly, fingers curling as if reaching for someone. She pressed the emergency call button, her voice steady but urgent. "Doctor, come quickly. He is responding." "Oh?" Miles away, standing in the greenhouse, Lily felt something shift in the air. She looked toward the horizon and whispered, "Come back, Adrian. It is time." And somewhere in that sterile white room, Adrian Hayes' eyelids fluttered for the first time, a faint whisper escaping his lips too soft to hear, but enough to change everything. The first rays of morning light slipped through the clouds, casting soft gold across St. James Medical Center. The city had barely begun to wake when the quiet hum of machines inside room 304 broke its rhythm. Adrian Hayes, the man who had been sleeping for months, opened his eyes. The nurse on duty gasped, nearly dropping the chart in her hands. She pressed the call button and leaned closer. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. Can you hear me? His eyes moved slowly, adjusting to the light. The world was blurry, voices distant, but the sound of that name, his name, pulled him back from the edge of silence. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice cracked like paper. Minutes later, doctors rushed into the room. Questions filled the air. Orientation checks, motor tests, flashes of light. Adrian's gaze drifted across the room, landing on the vase of white lilies on the table beside him. Something inside him stirred. That scent, faint and familiar, tugged at a memory he could not fully reach. Across town, Lily Hart was in the greenhouse, unaware that her world was about to shift forever. The air smelled of damp soil and orchids. She was watering the plants when her phone began to ring. It was the hospital. Mrs. Hayes, the nurse said, her tone trembling with excitement, he is awake. The watering can slipped from Lily's hand, clattering against the tile floor. Water spilled across her shoes, but she did not notice. Her breath caught in her chest. Awake? She whispered. Yes, the nurse confirmed. He regained consciousness about 20 minutes ago. The doctors are running tests, but he is responsive. He is asking for someone named Lily. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed a hand to her mouth and whispered, I am on my way. By the time she reached the hospital, the morning sun had broken fully through the clouds. The hallways seemed brighter, the air warmer. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, but there was an unspoken joy that followed her steps. When she reached the door to his room, she stopped. Her hands trembled on the handle. Mrs. Collier's words echoed in her mind. Be careful what truth you uncover. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Adrian was awake, sitting upright, pale but alive. His eyes, still weak, turned toward her the moment she entered. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft beeping of the monitor beside his bed. Lily, he said finally, his voice rough but certain. I thought you were a dream. She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. You remember me? I do not remember everything, he said, shaking his head slightly. But I remember your voice. You were there, weren't you? Every day. She nodded, stepping closer. I promised I would be. He looked down at his hand, where the wedding ring still rested. They said we were married, that you stood in for someone else. His tone was confused, but there was no accusation in it, only quiet wonder. Yes, she said softly. It was supposed to be temporary, a way to save my family, but I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since waking, a faint smile touched his face. Then, I think you saved more than your family. Before she could respond, the door opened again. Nathan Hayes stepped inside, his expression carefully composed. His eyes flicked between his brother and Lily. Well, he said evenly, this is a surprise. Welcome back to the living, Adrian. Adrian's gaze hardened slightly. How long has it been? Almost 6 months, Nathan replied. You have made quite the headlines while you were away. Adrian's eyes narrowed. And the company? Nathan smiled thinly. Thriving, of course. You have been in good hands. Lily could feel the tension in the room thicken. Adrian's eyes shifted toward her briefly, as if to ask silently what had happened while he was gone. She gave the smallest shake of her head, not now. The doctors entered to run another round of tests, forcing Nathan to step aside. As the medical team worked, Nathan leaned close to Lily and whispered, Careful, Mrs. Hayes. The truth you love so much may not love you back. Then he walked out, leaving a chill in his wake. Hours later, when the room had quieted, Adrian motioned weakly for her to sit beside him. Tell me what I missed, he said. Lily hesitated. You need rest. The doctors... He shook his head slowly. Please, I need to understand what I woke up to. She looked at him, at the strength already returning to his eyes, and made a decision. Someone tried to hurt you, she said quietly. Your accident. It was not an accident. I found your notes, the files you kept. You were close to uncovering something. His brow furrowed. Nathan, he whispered. I think so, she said. But I do not have proof, not yet. Adrian's hand found hers. Then we will find it together. For the first time since she had met him, His voice carried the quiet certainty of a man who knew who he was and what he had to do. That evening, when Lily left the hospital, the storm clouds had cleared completely. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement, like reflections of something reborn. She looked up at the sky, the faintest smile on her lips. The man she had promised to protect was alive. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Nathan would not let go of power easily, and the truth they had both touched was now too dangerous to remain buried. Back in his hospital bed, Adrian Hayes closed his eyes, the image of Lily's face imprinted in his mind. His voice, faint but resolute, broke the silence of the room. "She stayed," he murmured. "That means everything." Outside, the lilies in the vase swayed gently, as if in agreement, their white petals catching the light from the setting sun, a quiet sign that hope had returned. The following days passed in a blur of movement at St. James Medical Center. Reporters waited outside the main entrance, trying to capture a glimpse of the man who had come back from months of silence. The story of Adrian Hayes' awakening spread across every newspaper and television channel. The words "miracle recovery" were on every headline. Inside the hospital, however, the atmosphere was quieter. Doctors limited visitors, nurses kept the blinds half closed, and only a few people were allowed into Adrian's room. Lily Hart was one of them. Every morning, she brought fresh lilies to replace the ones that had wilted. The room smelled faintly of life again, and for the first time in months, her smile reached her eyes. Adrian's strength returned slowly. His speech grew clearer, his eyes sharper, and though his body was still weak, his mind was already awake and restless. On the third morning after his recovery, he asked for his laptop. The doctors refused at first, but he insisted. "I cannot heal while pretending my life outside does not exist," he said calmly. When Lily entered the room that afternoon, she found him sitting up, scrolling through a digital file. His brow was furrowed. "You should not push yourself," she said, setting the flowers on the table. "The doctor said you need rest." "I have rested enough," he replied quietly. "Lily, tell me something truthfully. While I was gone, did Nathan take over everything?" She hesitated. "Yes. The company, the foundation, even the estate. He said it was temporary, but I do not think he plans to give it back." Adrian's expression hardened. "And my accident, did you find anything?" She looked at the floor, then met his eyes. "I found your notes, the ones you kept in the safe. You were investigating financial discrepancies in the Hayes Group. I think Nathan knew. There were forged signatures, offshore accounts, and transactions that disappeared before the crash." He was silent for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop and leaned back, his voice low and controlled. "That means he tried to remove the only person who could stop him." Lily reached for his hand. "You cannot confront him yet. You are still recovering." Adrian looked at her, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. "You have been taking care of me for months, haven't you?" She nodded. "Because I promised I would." He turned his hand and laced his fingers with hers. "Then let me take care of this. But I will need your help." That evening, the doctor allowed Lily to stay late. She sat by Adrian's bedside as he dictated a short message for his lawyer, a request for an immediate audit of the company's board. His voice was quiet but steady. When he finished, he leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "everything begins again." Outside the hospital, the city lights glowed against the wet pavement. Nathan Hayes stood under a street lamp, reading a message on his phone. His eyes darkened as he read the news. Adrian Hayes regains consciousness. He crushed the paper cup in his hand and dropped it into the trash. "So the ghost wakes up," he muttered. Back inside the hospital, Lily had fallen asleep in the chair beside Adrian's bed. He watched her for a long moment, his gaze softening. The world he had woken into was unfamiliar, half built on deceit and half held together by her kindness. The next morning, he was discharged under special supervision. The doctors agreed that he was strong enough to continue recovery at home with medical staff on site. When the car stopped in front of the Hayes mansion, Lily felt her breath catch. The house, once cold and quiet, now looked different under the spring sunlight. But the silence inside was still sharp. Mrs. Collier greeted them at the door, her voice formal. "Welcome home, Mr. Hayes. The West Wing has been prepared for your return." "Oh," Adrian nodded politely, but his eyes searched the corners of the hall, as if tracing memories left behind. Then Nathan appeared at the top of the staircase, his expression smooth and calculated. "Brother," Nathan said with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "I was beginning to think we would never see you again." Adrian's tone was calm, but his gaze was steady. "I am sure that thought brought you comfort." Nathan's smile tightened. "We have much to discuss. The company needs stability. I can handle operations until you are fully ready." "That will not be necessary," Adrian said. "I am ready now." The tension between them filled the room like static. Lily felt it from where she stood. She could see Nathan's jaw tighten, his polite facade slipping for the briefest moment. "Well then," Nathan said finally, his voice light but his eyes dark. "Welcome back to your kingdom, brother." That night, Lily helped Adrian settle into his suite. The nurses checked his vitals, the staff arranged his medication, and soon the room was quiet again. When everyone left, he turned to her. "Thank you for staying," he said. "You do not have to thank me," she replied softly. "I would not leave you now." He looked at her for a long time, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. "Lily," he said slowly, "when I was unconscious, I heard your voice every day. It kept me alive. Do you believe in that sort of thing?" She smiled faintly. "I do now." For a while, they sat in silence. The soft sound of rain returned outside, gentle and rhythmic. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice quiet but certain. "Tomorrow, I will confront him. No more pretending." Lily's heart tightened. "Be careful," he nodded. "I will. But if anything happens, promise me one thing." "What?" "Do not let fear silence you. You are the only person who tells the truth in this house." She wanted to protest, but his eyes held hers, steady and warm. So she simply nodded. When she left his room that night, she looked back one last time. Adrian was sitting by the window, watching the rain. The man who had once been silent was awake now, not just in body, but in purpose. And somewhere deep inside the mansion, Nathan Hayes poured himself another drink, staring into the dark glass. "If you are planning to take everything back, brother," he whispered to himself, "you are going to have to fight me for it." Outside, thunder rolled once again over the estate, and the quiet storm that had begun in silence was finally ready to break. Morning arrived over the Hayes estate with a strange quiet, the kind that came before a storm. The mist rolled through the gardens, wrapping the mansion in silver haze. Inside, the air was still. Every sound, the tick of the grandfather clock, the soft creak of the wooden stairs felt louder than usual, as if the house itself were waiting. Adrian Hayes had been awake for 5 days now. Though his body remained fragile, his mind was sharper than ever. He had regained control of his voice, his memory, and the weight of everything he had lost. The first thing he remembered after the crash was the sound of Lily Hart's voice, soft, determined, and real. Now that he was home, her voice was still the only one he trusted. In the breakfast room, the table was set for two. The light from the tall windows spilled over the porcelain cups and untouched food. Lily sat quietly, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. Across from her, Adrian reviewed a small folder of documents that had arrived from his attorney that morning. "They confirmed it," he said finally, his tone calm but tight. "The financial transfers I discovered before the crash, they lead to accounts under Nathan's name. Offshore holdings, shell companies, all connected to the foundation. He moved millions." Lily's eyes widened. "So he did it. He tried to stop you from finding out." Adrian nodded slowly. "It looks that way, but without the original hard drives or the full board's records, it is only suspicion. Nathan still controls access." She hesitated, then asked softly, "What will you do?" He closed the folder and met her gaze. "I will take back what is mine, but I will do it the right way." Before either of them could say more, footsteps echoed from the corridor. Nathan entered the room, polished and composed in a gray suit. His smile was perfectly measured, but his eyes were steel. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "You look stronger every day, Adrian." "It is good to see." Adrian did not smile. "It is good to see the man who ran my company while I was in a hospital bed. I imagine you have much to tell me." Nathan chuckled lightly, pouring himself coffee. "Only that I kept everything running. I did what was necessary. The market does not wait for sentiment. Nor does greed." Adrian replied evenly. For a second, the air between them went still. Lily's hands tightened on her cup. Nathan's expression did not change, but the faintest edge crept into his voice. Careful, brother. That sounds like an accusation. Only if it is true, Adrian said. Nathan set his cup down. If you have something to say, say it. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but cold. I know about the transfers, the accounts, the falsified ledgers, and I know that the brakes on my car did not fail by accident. Nathan's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed smooth. That is a bold story, Adrian. One that might impress reporters, but not the board of directors. We will see, Adrian said, because I plan to call an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Everything will be laid out in front of them. Nathan rose from his chair, his smile gone now. You are not ready for that kind of fight. The company remembers the months you were asleep. I built its reputation while you were dreaming. You may have woken up, but this is still my house, my board, my power. Lily stood, her voice steady. You mean your lies? Nathan turned to her, his tone dripping with mockery. And you, Mrs. Hayes, what are you exactly? The substitute bride? The nurse who decided to play savior? She saved me, Adrian said sharply, and that makes her more part of this family than you will ever be. For a brief moment, the two men stood facing each other, the contrast stark, one driven by greed, the other by quiet resolve. Then Nathan smirked and straightened his jacket. Very well, call your meeting. But remember, the truth is only as powerful as the people willing to believe it. He left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Lily exhaled slowly. He will not stop. Adrian looked at her, his voice soft but firm. Neither will I. Later that afternoon, the house filled with movement. Legal advisors arrived, staff whispered in corners, and the tension thickened with each passing hour. Adrian spent most of the evening in his study, reviewing files, dictating letters, and preparing his statement. Lily stayed nearby, watching him from the doorway. The way he moved, the focus in his eyes, it was the man she had imagined while he slept. Strong, steady, unyielding. At one point, he looked up and caught her watching. You have been quiet, he said gently. I was thinking, she admitted. When you were in that hospital bed, I used to read to you. Stories about people who survived impossible things. I think I read them as much for myself as for you. Adrian smiled faintly. And what did those stories teach you? That surviving is not enough, she said. You have to rebuild. He nodded. Then that is what we will do. As night fell, rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Lily left a lamp burning in the hall outside his room, a quiet gesture of faith. She knew the fight ahead would not be easy, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer the frightened woman who had been forced into a marriage she did not want. She was standing beside a man who had chosen truth over fear, and that made all the difference. In the study, Adrian looked out the window, his reflection blending with the rain. His voice was low but certain. Tomorrow, the lies end. And somewhere in the house, Nathan Hayes stood in the darkened corridor, listening through the half-open door, his face hidden in shadow. A faint, dangerous smile curved his lips as he whispered to himself, "We will see about that." The clock in the hall struck midnight, its sound echoing through the mansion like the toll of a warning bell. The storm outside grew louder, mirroring the one that was about to break within the Hayes family. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Hayes mansion, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled inside. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind a damp quiet. Yet beneath that stillness, tension pulsed like electricity in the air. The emergency board meeting was only a few hours away. Every minute seemed to stretch longer than the one before. In the study, Adrian Hayes reviewed his final notes, while Lily Hart stood by the window, her hands folded together to hide their trembling. He glanced up. "You do not have to stay in the room during the meeting," he said gently. "It could get ugly." She shook her head. "I stayed when you could not speak. I am staying now when you finally can." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then you are braver than most people I have ever known." Before he could say more, the door opened. Mrs. Collier entered quietly, her expression serious. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "reporters are already gathering outside the gates. It seems your brother informed the press about the meeting. Adrian's eyes hardened. Of course he did. He wants control of the story before the truth gets out. Mrs. Collier hesitated before adding, "Be careful, sir." Mr. Nathan does not lose gracefully. After she left, Adrian closed the folder on his desk and turned to Lily. He is not the only one who knows how to fight. At 10 o'clock sharp, the mansion's great hall was transformed into a boardroom. Long tables stretched beneath the chandeliers, and a dozen directors from the Hayes group filled the seats, whispering among themselves. Nathan stood near the head of the table, his confidence unshaken, his smile fixed like armor. When Adrian entered, every whisper stopped. His steps were steady, his posture straight, the image of a man who had survived both death and betrayal. Lily followed behind, standing quietly near the wall. "Gentlemen," Adrian began, his voice calm but commanding, "thank you for coming on short notice. I called this meeting to address matters that have been kept from you, matters that concern the integrity of this company." Nathan leaned casually against the table. "Integrity?" he repeated, his tone smooth. "Brother, you have been awake for less than a week. Surely you do not believe you can question the operations that kept this company alive while you were gone." Adrian's gaze was sharp. Alive, perhaps? Honest? No. He opened the folder and laid several printed pages on the table. These are financial records, showing transfers from the Hayes Foundation into private accounts under your management. The same accounts tied to the fake subsidiaries I discovered before my crash. "Oh." Murmurs rippled through the room. Nathan's expression tightened, but quickly recovered. "You have no proof those are mine. Anyone could have created them." "I expected you to say that," Adrian replied. He pressed a small flash drive into the projector connected to the wall. The screen lit up with a series of scanned signatures, Nathan's, repeated on each falsified document. "But the auditors matched the handwriting. These were your approvals." For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then Nathan laughed softly. "So you have been busy, even from your hospital bed. Impressive. But you should remember, Adrian, that accidents happen. People make mistakes." "Like cutting the brakes on a car?" Adrian asked. His tone was quiet, but it hit the room like a gunshot. The directors turned sharply toward Nathan. His mask slipped for a fraction of a second before he regained it. "Careful what you imply, brother. That is a dangerous accusation." "It is not an implication," Adrian said. "It is the truth. I survived because Lily pulled me from that wreck before the fire reached the fuel line. I may have been unconscious, but I remember enough. The investigators found tampering with the braking system, evidence that mysteriously disappeared once you took control." The murmurs turned into full voices now, questions and disbelief filling the air. Nathan raised his voice to cut through the noise. "Do you have any idea what you are risking? You are dragging this family's name through the dirt." Adrian stood tall. "I am saving it." For several long seconds, they faced each other across the table, brother against brother, silence against power. Then Nathan turned sharply to the board. "You cannot believe this nonsense. The man just woke up from a coma. He is confused." But Lily stepped forward before anyone could respond. "He is not confused," she said clearly. "I saw the files myself. I saw your signature. And I saw the fear in your eyes when you realized I found them." All eyes turned to her. She did not waver. Nathan's smile vanished completely. "You have no right to speak here," he snapped. "She has every right," Adrian said firmly. "She is my wife. And she is the only reason I am alive to tell this story." The room fell silent again. The weight of his words filled the space like thunder. The directors exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, the oldest among them spoke. "Mr. Hayes," he said to Nathan, "until this is investigated, we will temporarily suspend your access to all accounts." Nathan's jaw clenched. "You cannot do that." "We just did," the man replied. Nathan turned to Adrian, fury burning behind his eyes. "You think this is over? You have no idea what you have started." Adrian met his gaze evenly. "Maybe for the first time, I know exactly what I have started." Nathan stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The directors began gathering their papers, whispering among themselves. Lily moved to Adrian's side, her voice soft. "You did it." He looked at her, his expression weary but certain. "Not yet. He will not give up easily. But the truth is out now, and that changes everything." As they left the room together, sunlight poured through the tall windows once more. washing over the hall like a quiet promise. The storm inside the Hayes mansion had only begun, but for the first time, Lily and Adrian were no longer walking through it alone. The day after the board meeting, the Hayes mansion no longer felt like the silent fortress it once was. For the first time, doors opened instead of closing, whispers carried truth instead of lies, and sunlight reached corners that had been dark for far too long. Yet beneath the calm surface, everyone in the house could feel it, the unease that came before the next battle. Adrian Hayes spent the morning in his study, reading through stacks of files and messages from his legal team. The board had suspended Nathan's control of the company's finances, but that decision was only temporary. In less than a week, there would be an official hearing to determine who would permanently lead the Hayes Group. Lily Hart sat across from him, quietly reviewing the documents he had asked her to organize. Her hands moved carefully, but her mind was still replaying Nathan's last words before he stormed out of the meeting. "You have no idea what you have started. Adrian," she said softly. "He will not stop. He has too much to lose." Adrian looked up, his eyes calm but tired. "I know. That is why we cannot stop either." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "There is still one piece missing. The original data, the hard drive I kept hidden before the crash. It contained every record of his transactions. Without that, the board can only act on partial evidence." Lily's brow furrowed. "Where was it kept?" "In the vault under the east wing," he said. "But Nathan changed all the access codes while I was gone. We will have to find another way in." Before Lily could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Collier entered, holding a sealed envelope. "This was delivered by courier," she said. "No return address." Adrian took the envelope carefully and opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of Lily leaving the hospital 2 days earlier, followed by a short note written in neat, familiar handwriting. "Some people are loyal until loyalty costs them something." Lily felt a chill run through her. "He is watching me," she said quietly. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then he is desperate. That means we are close." Later that afternoon, Adrian insisted on returning to the hospital to thank the medical staff who had cared for him. The security team followed discreetly, though Lily could sense Nathan's presence even from miles away the way a storm could be felt before it appeared. At St. James Medical Center, the doctors greeted Adrian warmly. Nurses smiled and congratulated him, calling his recovery a miracle. As they walked down the familiar hallway, Lily paused beside room 304, the room where she had spent endless nights, whispering to a man who could not answer. Adrian noticed her silence. "You spent a lot of time here," he said softly. She nodded. "This room saw me at my weakest, but it also saw me become someone stronger." He smiled faintly. "Then, it saw both of us change." Before they left, a nurse approached with a small metal case. "We found this among your belongings after the accident, Mr. Hayes," she said. "We meant to return it, but with the transfer of departments, it was misplaced." Adrian took the case, his hands steady, though his eyes betrayed recognition. "Thank you," he said. When they returned to the car, he opened it. Inside, wrapped in a protective sleeve, was a portable hard drive scratched but intact. Lily gasped softly. "That is it, isn't it?" He nodded slowly. "The original records, everything Nathan tried to erase." That evening, back at the mansion, Adrian connected the drive to his computer. Line after line of data filled the screen transfers, names, dates, and emails. Lily watched as the puzzle that had haunted them for months began to take shape. "It is all here," he said, scrolling through the files. "Every forged account, every hidden transaction. Enough to expose him completely." Lily's heart lifted with cautious relief. "Then, it is over." "Huh." Adrian looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Not yet. He will know we have this. When he realizes, he will not sit quietly." And he was right. Just after midnight, the mansion's power flickered. The lights dimmed, then went out completely. The generator started a few seconds later, casting a low hum through the halls. Adrian looked up from his desk. "That was not a storm," he said. Lily's pulse quickened. "You think it is him?" Adrian rose slowly. "I think he wants us to know he is close." They moved cautiously through the corridor toward the main hall. The air was heavy, filled with that same electric quiet that always came before something broke. Then, from the front door, came the sound of tires screeching against the gravel. A car had stopped abruptly at the gate. Mrs. Collier appeared, her face pale. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "It is Nathan. He is here." Adrian exchanged a look with Lily. "So it begins," he said quietly. The main doors opened, and Nathan stepped inside, drenched from the light rain, his smile cold and sharp. "Brother," he said smoothly, "I thought I would drop by to congratulate you on your recovery. I hear you are doing some late-night accounting." Adrian did not flinch. "You are here for the drive." Nathan's eyes glimmered with something between admiration and hatred. "You always were the clever one, but you forget everything in this house still bears the Hayes name, including what you think you own." "You are wrong," Adrian said. "The truth belongs to no one. It just waits to be seen." Nathan took a step closer, his voice lowering. "Then be careful what you show the world, brother. Once you open that door, there is no closing it again." The room fell silent. The storm outside had not yet reached the estate, but thunder rolled faintly in the distance, like a promise of what was coming. Lily stood beside Adrian, her hand brushing his arm, not in fear, but in defiance. "Let it come," she said softly. Nathan's eyes narrowed, his smile fading. Then he turned, walking back into the rain without another word. As the door closed behind him, Adrian exhaled slowly. "He knows we have it." "Yes," Lily said quietly, her voice steady. "And now he knows we are not afraid." Oh. Outside, the first drops of thunderstorm rain began to fall again, washing over the gates of the Hayes estate, as if cleansing it for what was still to come. The next morning broke under a gray sky. Clouds hung low over the Hayes estate, pressing the horizon down like a weight. The storm from the night before had passed, but the air was still thick with tension. The mansion, once a symbol of power and wealth, now felt like a battleground waiting for the first strike. Adrian Hayes barely slept. He spent most of the night in his study, staring at the glowing lines of code and numbers that filled his computer screen. The data from the recovered hard drive was clear and damning. There was no more room for doubt. Nathan had stolen millions from the Hayes Foundation and hidden them across multiple shell accounts overseas. Every transaction was time-stamped, traced, and backed by copies of official documents. It was enough to destroy him completely. Lily Hart entered the study carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her steps were quiet, her expression calm but watchful. She set 1 cup beside him. "You have been up all night," she said softly. "You need rest." Adrian shook his head. "Rest can wait. If Nathan realizes how much evidence we have, he will strike first." She looked at the screen. "Then what is the plan?" "I will present the files to the board tomorrow morning," he said. "This time, there will be no escape for him." Lily hesitated. "He came here last night, Adrian. He will not walk into a meeting unprepared. You know what he is capable of." Adrian met her eyes, his voice steady but firm. "I know, but I am not the man he left in that car, and he is not the untouchable figure he once believed himself to be." Before she could answer, Mrs. Collier entered quietly. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "you have a visitor." Adrian frowned. "At this hour?" "Yes, it is Mr. Nathan's assistant, Mr. Vaughn. He says it is urgent." Adrian exchanged a quick glance with Lily. "Send him in." Moments later, a tall man in a dark coat stepped into the room. His expression was tense, his voice low. "Mr. Hayes, I came here at great risk. I have worked for Nathan for 10 years, but I cannot keep silent anymore. I know what he did to you." Lily's eyes widened. "You mean the accident?" The man nodded. "He planned it. He ordered someone to tamper with your car. He said you were getting too close to something dangerous." He reached into his coat and handed Adrian a flash drive. "This contains the communications between Nathan and the mechanic who worked on your vehicle. Emails, payments, everything. I made copies before he realized I was watching." Adrian took the drive, his hands steady, though his chest tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" The man's voice broke slightly. "Because he is planning something worse. He told me last night that if the board believes you, he will make sure neither of you nor your wife survive to see the vote." Lily felt her breath catch. "You mean he would—" "Yes," the man said quickly. "He is desperate. I came to warn you." Adrian rose from his chair, his face pale but composed. "Thank you. You did the right thing. Get as far from this house as you can. Do not go back to him." The man nodded. his shoulders shaking with quiet fear, then left. After he was gone, silence filled the study. The only sound was the faint hum of the computer. Lily turned to Adrian, her voice trembling. "He will not stop. He will come for us." Adrian looked out the window, watching the wind move through the trees. "Then we will make sure he has no reason to come back." That night, the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. The staff moved quietly, the lights dimmed early, and even the wind seemed to hush against the glass. Adrian stayed in his study, securing the data and copying every piece of evidence to external storage. Lily helped him pack the files, her movements methodical, her face pale under the soft light. When the last file transferred, Adrian unplugged the drive and slipped it into a leather case. "This is everything," he said. "If something happens to me, take this straight to the authorities." She shook her head. "Do not say that. I have to," he said quietly. "I need to know you are ready." Before she could respond, a sudden noise echoed from outside, the sound of car tires against gravel. Lily froze. "Someone is here." Adrian moved toward the window and looked out. 2 black cars were parked at the end of the drive. Headlights cut through the fog. "It is him," Adrian said. "He came early." Lily's heart raced. "What do we do?" He turned to her, his voice calm despite the tension in his eyes. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens, do not let go of that case." Oh. Moments later, heavy footsteps echoed through the hall. The front doors opened, and Nathan Hayes walked in, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. He was calm, too calm, his expression unreadable. "Brother," he said smoothly, "I hear you have been collecting stories about me. Dangerous habit, that." Adrian stood tall. "You came here to silence me, but it is too late. I have everything I need to end this." Nathan smiled faintly, tilting his head. "End this? You think truth wins in rooms like ours?" "No, Adrian. Power does." He took another step forward, but Lily moved in front of Adrian, her voice sharp and clear. "Power is nothing without integrity." Nathan's smile faltered for the first time. He looked at her, his tone soft but venomous. "You have cost me more than you know, Mrs. Hayes." Adrian's voice was low but filled with fire. "Touch her, and I will show you just how much you have already lost." For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Nathan gestured to his men. "We will see each other tomorrow, brother. The board will decide who the true Hayes is." He turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps fading down the marble hall. When the doors closed, Lily finally exhaled. Adrian took her hand, his voice quiet but certain. "Tomorrow," he said, "we end this for good." Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon again, splitting the sky open with light, a warning and a promise all at once. The final reckoning between truth and power was coming with the dawn. The morning of the board hearing arrived under a heavy, unmoving sky. A cold wind swept through the gates of the Hayes estate, bending the branches of the oak trees as if nature itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was tense but purposeful. Every clock seemed louder than usual, every breath measured. Adrian Hayes stood in front of the mirror in his study, adjusting the cufflinks his late father had once worn. His reflection looked stronger now. The pale man who had lain in a hospital bed for months was gone. What remained was someone sharpened by pain and truth. Behind him, Lily Hart watched quietly, holding the leather case that contained every piece of evidence they had gathered. "You do not have to come," he said softly. "I know," she replied, "but I will." "Oh." He turned, his gaze meeting hers. "You have already risked enough." She shook her head. "You do not fight alone anymore. You made sure of that." Before he could respond, Mrs. Collier entered, her usually calm face lined with worry. "The cars are ready, Mr. Hayes. The board meeting begins at 10 o'clock sharp." Adrian nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Collier. You have done more for this family than anyone else ever could." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Be careful, sir." "Mr. Nathan has been on the phone all morning. I heard him telling someone that today would end everything." Lily's grip on the case tightened. "Then let us make sure it ends the right way." The drive to the Hayes Group headquarters felt longer than usual. Rain clouds gathered above the city, reflecting off the glass towers like bruised steel. The car interior was silent, broken only by the low hum of the engine. Adrian stared out the window, his thoughts focused, his resolve solidifying with every passing block. When they arrived, reporters crowded the entrance. Flashing cameras and shouted questions filled the air, but security cleared a path. "Mr. Hayes, is it true your brother embezzled funds?" one voice called. "Mrs. Hayes, is it true your marriage was arranged?" shouted another. Lily kept her eyes forward. Adrian walked beside her, tall and steady. "Let them talk," he said under his breath. "Truth will speak for us soon enough." Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Every director was present. Nathan Hayes stood near the head of the table, his composure flawless, his smile practiced. He looked like the image of confidence, a man certain of his power. When Adrian and Lily entered, conversation stopped. Nathan's eyes flicked toward the leather case in Lily's hands, and for a brief second, something dark crossed his face. Then he smiled. "Brother," he said smoothly, "you are just in time." The board was growing impatient. Adrian set the case on the table. "Then let us not waste more time." Nathan gestured toward the directors. "As you know, there have been accusations, baseless ones, of course regarding my management of the company. I have gathered evidence to disprove them, and I expect full confidence to be restored today." Adrian's voice was calm. "And I have gathered proof that will do the opposite." He opened the case and pulled out the hard drive, placing it on the projector. The screen behind him lit up, displaying rows of numbers, offshore accounts, and digital signatures, each one traced directly to Nathan Hayes. Gasps filled the room as Adrian spoke, his tone steady, deliberate. "These are the financial records of the Hayes Foundation. Every missing dollar is here. The board's funds were siphoned through false subsidiaries into personal accounts under Nathan's control. These transfers coincide with the dates of major foundation projects that were never completed." Nathan laughed lightly, though his face had gone pale. "You expect them to believe a few forged documents?" Adrian clicked another file open this time, a video recording from Nathan's former assistant, Mr. Vaughn. His voice echoed through the room. Nathan Hayes ordered the sabotage of his brother's vehicle. He said Adrian had discovered the hidden accounts and needed to be silenced. The room erupted into stunned silence. Adrian turned back to the board. "You have heard it from his own employee. I nearly died for uncovering the truth. But I will not let this company, our father's legacy, die in silence too." Nathan's composure cracked. "You cannot prove I paid him. He is lying." Lily stepped forward, her voice clear. "We can. These are the payment records from your personal account to his firm, disguised as consulting fees." She held up the printed statements, her hand unwavering. Nathan's eyes darkened, rage replacing the smooth charm. "You think you can destroy me with this? With her?" He gestured toward Lily, his tone venomous. "She was never part of this family. She was a stand-in bride, a charity case." Adrian faced him, his voice rising with quiet strength. "She is the reason I am alive. She is the one who saved me when you tried to erase me. And she is the woman I choose, not by contract, but by heart." "Oh," the directors murmured among themselves. One of them, the eldest member, cleared his throat. "Mr. Nathan Hayes, in light of the evidence presented, we are voting for your immediate removal from all executive and financial positions. The investigation will proceed with federal oversight." Nathan's face turned cold. "You will regret this." Adrian met his gaze evenly. "No, brother. For the first time, I will not." Security entered the room, escorting Nathan out. He did not fight, but as he passed Adrian, he leaned close enough to whisper, "This is not over." When the doors closed behind him, the silence that followed was thick and heavy, but for the first time, it was not fearful. It was the sound of justice settling into place. Adrian turned to Lily, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. "It is done," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "No, it is just beginning." Outside, the rain began to fall, washing the city clean. In that moment, both of them knew that what had started as a fake marriage had turned into something real, built not from wealth or status, but from survival, truth, and the quiet courage of two people who refused to give up. And for the first time in years, the Hayes name stood for honor again. When the board meeting ended, The Hayes Group building seemed to exhale a long, collective breath. Reporters were still waiting outside, flashes from cameras reflecting off the glass doors like lightning. But inside, silence fell. The truth had been spoken, and power had changed hands. Nathan Hayes was gone. Adrian Hayes stood in the center of the now empty boardroom, his hand resting on the table. His eyes lingered on the scattered papers, the files, the fragments of a war that had nearly cost him his life. Across from him, Lily Hart gathered the last of their documents into the leather case that had become a symbol of their fight. "You did it," she said quietly. Adrian looked up, his expression unreadable. "We did it." She smiled faintly, but exhaustion was visible in her face. "So what happens now?" He paused before answering. "Now, we rebuild. The company, the foundation, everything he tried to destroy." As they walked out together, the morning rain had stopped. Reporters surrounded them, microphones raised, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. "Mr. Hayes, will you press charges against your brother?" "Mrs. Hayes, is it true your marriage began as an arrangement? Will you take control of the company permanently?" Adrian's voice was calm but firm. "The Hayes Group will continue its work with transparency and integrity. The rest will be handled by the proper authorities. Thank you." He guided Lily toward the waiting car. She could feel the tremor in his hand, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of finally reaching the truth. As the car pulled away, she looked out at the city that had once belonged to Nathan's world of manipulation and greed. For the first time, it felt like it could breathe again. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere had changed. The staff greeted Adrian and Lily, not with polite silence, but with quiet respect. Even Mrs. Collier, usually composed, allowed herself a small smile. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she said warmly. Adrian paused at the threshold. "Home?" he repeated softly. The word felt strange on his tongue, but it was no longer hollow. He spent the afternoon in his father's old study, signing documents and speaking with his legal team. Nathan had already fled the country, but the authorities had frozen his accounts. Justice would take its time, but it would come. When Adrian finally closed his laptop, the house was quiet. He found Lily in the greenhouse, kneeling beside the orchids she had nurtured since the day she arrived. The flowers were in full bloom now, their petals bright against the fading light. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. "When you first came here, you said this place felt cold." She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It did." "And now?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Now it feels alive again." He stepped closer, his gaze gentle. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of us." For a moment, silence stretched between them, peaceful and full. The air smelled of earth and rain, and somewhere outside, thunder rolled faintly across the distance. Adrian took her hand, his voice low. "I owe you more than gratitude, Lily. You gave me back more than my life. You reminded me what it means to stand for something good." She looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "You would have done the same for anyone." He smiled slightly. "No, only for you." They stood together in the soft glow of the greenhouse lights, surrounded by the flowers that had outlasted the storm. For the first time in months, there was no pretense, no contract, no shadow between them. Just truth, fragile but real. Later that evening, they shared dinner in the grand dining room, a space that had once felt too large for a single voice. The table, once a symbol of formality, now carried the warmth of quiet laughter and simple conversation. Mrs. Collier brought dessert herself, setting it down with a fond smile. "It has been a long time since this house sounded like a home," she said softly. After dinner, Adrian walked out onto the balcony, the city lights glowing in the distance. Lily joined him, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "Do you think he will ever come back?" she asked. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "Nathan has lost everything he built on lies, but men like him rarely stop running from the truth. If he does come back, he will find nothing left to take." Lily nodded, resting her hands on the balcony rail. "You are not afraid anymore." He turned to her, his voice steady. "Because I have nothing left to hide." She smiled, her gaze meeting his. "And everything left to live for." A quiet laugh escaped him. "You always find the right words." "Not always," she said softly. "Just when they matter." The night deepened around them, filled with the gentle hum of the city and the distant sound of rain returning. Adrian reached for her hand again, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Do you remember what you told me once?" he asked. "That surviving is not enough, we have to rebuild." She nodded. "I meant it. Then let us rebuild, Lily. Not just the company, but us, our lives. Everything from here on out." Her eyes softened. "Together?" He smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "Always." The wind carried the scent of orchids from the greenhouse, the flowers swaying in the moonlight. Somewhere beyond the estate gates, the world kept turning, but inside those walls, time seemed to slow. The house that had been a prison of secrets was now a place of beginnings. And as Lily leaned her head on Adrian's shoulder, he whispered the words neither of them had needed to say before, but both finally understood. "This was never supposed to be love," he said quietly. But somehow, it became the only thing that truly was. Outside, lightning flashed once across the horizon, not in warning this time, but like a curtain closing after the storm. The past had ended. The future, for the first time, belonged entirely to them. Weeks passed, and the world slowly returned to rhythm around the Hayes estate. The mansion that had once echoed with tension now carried the calm hum of restoration. Staff spoke freely again. The gardens bloomed under the early summer Sunday. The sound of piano music sometimes drifted through the open windows, the melody of a life no longer haunted by fear. Adrian Hayes had resumed his position as chairman of the Hayes Group. Under his direction, the company launched new projects that focused on rebuilding the foundation's original purpose, helping small businesses, hospitals, and education programs that his brother had once neglected. Every morning, headlines celebrated the Hayes redemption, but Adrian never cared for the attention. He only cared about doing things right this time. Lily Hart, now known to the public as Mrs. Hayes, not by contract but by her own quiet strength, had found her place too. She oversaw the Hayes Foundation's humanitarian branch, visiting hospitals and community centers, the same kind of places that had once helped her when she was struggling. Whenever people asked how she came to be part of the Hayes legacy, she always smiled and said, "By believing that kindness is not weakness." One late afternoon, Lily stood in the greenhouse, trimming the orchids she had grown from nearly dying stems. Their petals glowed pink and white beneath the sunlight. Adrian entered quietly, his jacket draped over his arm, the faintest trace of fatigue in his eyes. "Long day?" she asked gently. He smiled, loosening his tie. "Productive. The board approved the expansion of the foundation into 3 more cities." "That is incredible," she said. "Your father would be proud." He walked closer, brushing his fingers over one of the orchid petals. "He would be proud of you too. You turned this house back into a home." She looked up at him, her voice soft. "It was never the walls, Adrian. It was always the people inside them." For a moment, silence settled comfortably between them. The sunlight through the glass painted his features in gold, and she realized how much he had changed. The man who once lived behind layers of duty and restraint now stood open and unguarded, a man who had learned that strength and tenderness could exist together. He took her hand gently. "You know, when I was in that hospital bed, I did not see faces. I only heard a voice. It was yours. Every word pulled me back." Her eyes softened. "I was afraid you would never wake up." "Oh, I think some part of me already had," he said. "I just needed you to remind me what living felt like." They stood close, the quiet sound of rain beginning to fall on the greenhouse roof. The rhythm was steady, comforting, but peace, though earned, still carried shadows. That evening, Adrian received a call from the authorities. Nathan Hayes had been arrested while attempting to leave Europe under a false name. The news came without celebration, only a quiet sense of closure. When Adrian told Lily, she listened silently, then asked, "Do you hate him?" He took a long breath. "No, I pitied him. Everything he did was because he thought power could replace love. He never understood that control without compassion is just emptiness." She nodded slowly. "Then it ends here." "It does," he said. "No more running from the past." Days later, they attended the final court hearing. The courtroom was crowded with reporters, lawyers, and shareholders. Nathan stood in handcuffs, his face pale but defiant. When the judge announced the verdict guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted manslaughter, a hush fell over the room. Nathan looked at Adrian one last time. "You think this makes you righteous?" he said bitterly. "You were born lucky, Adrian. You do not understand what it means to fight for power." Adrian's voice was calm, steady. "You are wrong, Nathan. I fought for something greater than power. I fought for peace." "No." Nathan said nothing more as the guards led him away. For the first time, his footsteps no longer sounded like authority, they sounded like defeat. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds. Lily stood beside Adrian as reporters shouted questions again, but he only gave one answer. "This is not a victory, it is a beginning." That evening, back at the mansion, the air was warm and clear. The staff had lit candles in the garden for the foundation's charity dinner. Guests laughed softly under strings of golden lights, unaware that for Adrian and Lily, this night marked the first time in years they could simply breathe without fear. After the last guests left, Lily walked barefoot across the grass, her gown brushing against the flowers. Adrian followed, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "You know," he said with a teasing smile, "I think this is the first night the house has been quiet without tension." She laughed, the sound soft and bright. "I think it is the first night we have been quiet without worry." They stopped beneath the old oak tree, the same one that stood through every storm the estate had faced. Fireflies drifted through the air like tiny lights. Adrian handed her a glass and said, "To truth." She lifted hers. "To healing." Of their glasses touched, the sound ringing softly in the night. For a while, they said nothing they did not need to. The future no longer looked like something to survive, but something to build. As the wind rustled through the garden, Lily whispered, "Do you ever think about what might have happened if none of this had started?" He turned to her, smiling faintly. "Then I never would have met the woman who saved me." She smiled back. "And I never would have learned what love really means." The moonlight settled over them, quiet and silver. The world had turned, the pain had passed, and what remained was simple and pure, a love that had begun as a lie but endured as the truest thing either of them had ever known. Inside the greenhouse, the orchids swayed gently in the night breeze. Their petals glistened with dew, alive again just like the 2 hearts that had learned to bloom after the storm. The morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of the Hayes mansion. The air carried the scent of fresh rain and blooming jasmine from the gardens. It had been several weeks since Nathan Hayes's conviction, and for the first time in years, the estate felt at peace. The tension that once haunted every hallway had lifted, replaced by warmth, laughter, and the steady rhythm of rebuilding. Adrian Hayes sat at his desk in the study, reviewing reports from the Hayes Foundation's new initiatives. His posture was relaxed, though focus still lit his eyes. Across the room, the large window overlooked the greenhouse where Lily Hart, now Lily Hayes, was tending to the orchids. Every time he looked at her through the glass, he was reminded of how far they had come from strangers bound by duty to 2 people who had built something unbreakable out of truth. Mrs. Collier entered quietly, carrying the morning mail. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said with a smile. "You look like a man planning another victory." Adrian chuckled softly. "Just progress, Mrs. Collier. I have had enough of battles." She placed the envelopes on his desk and hesitated. "There is one more thing," she said gently. "The hospital called. They asked if you and Mrs. Hayes would attend the opening of the new children's wing. They want to dedicate it in your name." Adrian's expression softened. "In my name? They said it was inspired by the Foundation's latest donation," she explained. "The one Lily organized." "Ah." He looked toward the greenhouse again, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "Then it is her name they should use, not mine." Mrs. Collier smiled knowingly. "She would say the same thing about you." Later that afternoon, Adrian joined Lily in the greenhouse. The space glowed with color orchids, roses, and vines curling along glass walls. Lily wore her garden gloves, a few streaks of soil on her cheek, her hair pulled loosely back. "Do you ever stop working?" Adrian teased, leaning against the doorframe. She smiled without turning. "Do you?" He laughed softly. "Touché." Then he stepped closer. "The hospital called. They want to name the new wing after us." She looked up, surprised. "After us?" He nodded. "But I told them it should be named after you. You made it happen." Her eyes warmed. "No, Adrian. It should be named for everyone this family hurt before we found the courage to change." The Foundation's work is not about us, it is about second chances. He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "You always see the good in what others would rather forget." "That is what you taught me," she replied. A breeze stirred through the greenhouse, rustling the flowers. The sunlight shifted, catching her hair in gold. For a long moment, he simply watched her, his heart full in a way he could not quite explain. That evening, they attended the dedication ceremony. The hospital courtyard was filled with doctors, patients, and volunteers. Children in bright gowns waved handmade signs that said, "Thank you, Hayes Foundation." The plaque unveiled that day bore the words, "The Lily Wing, a place of hope and healing." When Lily saw her name, she turned to Adrian in shock. "You changed it?" He smiled. "I only told the truth." She blinked back tears as applause rose around them. When she took the microphone to speak, her voice trembled at first but grew stronger with each word. "This place is more than bricks and glass," she said. "It is a promise that no matter how much we lose, there is always a way to begin again. I once believed my life was defined by what I did not have. But standing here, I know it is defined by the love and courage that find us when we least expect it." The crowd fell silent, moved by her words. Adrian watched her with pride, not as the man who had rescued her, but as someone who had learned what love truly meant through her strength. That night, back at the mansion, the celebration continued quietly among the staff. Mrs. Collier insisted on baking her famous apple tart, and for the first time in years, the dining room was filled with laughter that did not feel forced. After everyone had gone to bed, Adrian and Lily walked together along the terrace. The moonlight bathed the gardens in silver, and the faint sound of crickets filled the air. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I think about how strange it all was. How we met, how everything began." He smiled, his tone gentle. "Fate does have a peculiar sense of humor. It almost feels like it happened to someone else," she continued. "That girl who stood at the altar, terrified and alone. I barely recognize her." Adrian stopped and turned to face her. "I recognize her," he said quietly. "She is the woman who saved me." Lily's eyes shimmered. "You always say that." "Because it is true," he replied. "You taught me that leadership is not about control, and love is not about possession. It is about standing beside someone, even when the world turns against you." She smiled faintly. "And you taught me that kindness can be powerful." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Then I suppose we both learned something worth keeping." They stood there for a while, watching the horizon where the city lights met the night sky. The wind carried the faint scent of orchids from the greenhouse, a reminder of how life, even when broken, could bloom again with care. Finally, Lily whispered, "Do you think the story is over?" Adrian looked at her, his eyes warm. "No," he said. "The storm ended. Now it is time for the calm." She smiled. "Then let us make it last." He kissed her forehead gently. "We will." As the clock inside the mansion struck midnight, the world around them settled into peace. The fight was behind them, but their journey, the real one, was only beginning. And in the quiet glow of that moment, Adrian and Lily Hayes finally stood not as symbols of tragedy, but as proof that love, when built on truth, could outlast even the darkest storms. Morning sunlight spread softly across the Hayes estate, touching every corner of the garden with a golden glow. The days had begun to follow a peaceful rhythm now. The storms of deceit and betrayal that once defined their lives had faded into quiet memory. In their place grew something steadier, not the fragile calm that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from healing. Adrian Hayes sat on the veranda, a cup of coffee in his hand, reading through reports from the latest foundation project. Across the lawn, Lily Hayes was speaking with two volunteers who had come from the city to discuss the expansion of a school program. Her voice was warm, confident, and grounded the same voice that had once read to him in a hospital room when he could not even open his eyes. When she finished her conversation and approached him, he lowered the papers and smiled. "You are turning into quite the leader, Mrs. Hayes." She laughed softly, taking a seat beside him. "Only because I had a patient teacher." "Patient?" he teased. "I do not remember being patient." "You were," she said, glancing toward the horizon. "Even when everything was falling apart, you still believed there was something worth saving." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "There was. And there still is." "Oh, why?" For a moment, they sat in silence, the wind carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. Life, after so much chaos, had finally begun to feel normal. But even in peace, the echoes of the past lingered like shadows, not dark enough to frighten, but impossible to forget. That afternoon, they drove into the city to attend a board meeting for the Hayes Foundation. The meeting was smaller than the ones they used to face. This was not about crisis or control. It was about progress. The directors discussed scholarship programs, medical grants, and community rebuilding projects Adrian had once dreamed of when he first took over the company from his father. At the end of the meeting, one of the senior members stood and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, the board wishes to thank you for restoring not only this company's reputation, but also its purpose. You reminded us that power means nothing if it does not serve people." Applause filled the room. Adrian nodded in gratitude, but when his eyes met Lily's, he saw quiet emotion instead of pride. Later, as they walked out together, she said softly, "For so long, I thought people like you and me lived in two different worlds. But now, standing here, it feels like we were always meant to meet halfway." He smiled. "That is where the real world lives, between power and compassion." Oh. They spent the evening walking through the city park, a place neither of them had visited since before his accident. The trees were in full bloom. Children were laughing near the fountains, and the rhythm of life was steady and kind. Adrian watched Lily as she looked around, her eyes taking in every detail. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was younger, I thought success was about having control. About never bending. But I was wrong. True success is what survives after everything else breaks." Lily nodded. "And love?" He smiled faintly. "Love is what makes it worth rebuilding." They returned home just as twilight settled over the estate. The staff had left early, and Mrs. Collier had arranged dinner for them on the terrace. The long table was lit by soft candles, their flames flickering gently against the night breeze. During dinner, Adrian asked, "Do you ever think about what you want next?" She hesitated, then said honestly, "For the first time in my life, I do not have a plan. I just want to keep doing what matters, to help, to create, to grow. Maybe that is what happiness really is. Not having everything, but knowing you are where you are meant to be." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Then promise me one thing, that no matter what the future brings, we will keep building that life together." "I promise," she said, her voice steady. Later, as the candles burned lower, they walked down to the greenhouse. The air inside was warm, filled with the scent of orchids and earth. The flowers Lily had once rescued now filled every shelf, vivid and strong. Adrian looked around, his expression soft. "This place used to feel like a reminder of everything broken," he said quietly. "Now it feels like home." "That is because it is alive again," she replied. He nodded, touching one of the blossoms gently. "You did that." "No," she said. "We did it together." The next morning, a letter arrived from the Hayes Group's global partners. They had approved a major international collaboration, one that would fund sustainable housing and medical centers across developing countries. It was the kind of project Adrian's father had always wanted but never lived to see. Adrian showed the letter to Lily, and she smiled. "Your father would be proud." He looked down at the signature line where his name now stood beside hers. "Ours would be prouder," he said, "because it took both of us to get here." That evening, they hosted a small celebration with the staff and local families the foundation had helped. The garden lights glowed softly, music played in the background, and laughter filled the air. For once, it did not feel like a grand event, just people gathered because they believed in something good. As the night drew to a close, Lily stood beside Adrian under the oak tree. "Do you ever think we were meant to go through everything we did just to end up here?" she asked. He looked at her, his voice low. "I used to think fate was cruel. Now I think it is simply patient." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Then let us be patient too." "Ho!" He wrapped an arm around her, the stars reflecting in his eyes. "We have time now, time to live, time to give, time to just be." And as the night deepened, the house that had once held secrets and sorrow stood bathed in the quiet glow of renewal. Every window shimmered with light. Every flower bloomed in defiance of what once tried to destroy them. The Hayes mansion, reborn from ruin, no longer belonged to power or legacy, it belonged to love. A love that had been tested, scarred, and remade into something stronger than both fate and fear. Autumn arrived quietly at the Hayes estate, brushing the trees with gold and amber. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Life had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting the past, but from making peace with it. Adrian Hayes stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. Below, Lily Hayes was walking along the stone path, her long coat fluttering in the breeze. She paused to speak with one of the gardeners, laughing at something he said, her smile warm and effortless. Watching her, Adrian felt a quiet gratitude he could never quite put into words. The woman who had once been forced into his world had now become the heart of it. The mansion, once a cage of pride and secrecy, now pulsed with life, purpose, and laughter. Later that morning, they sat together near the fireplace, reviewing new proposals for the foundation. Lily leaned closer and said softly, "Do you ever miss the way things used to be?" He thought for a moment before answering. "No," he said simply, "because back then, I did not know what real peace felt like." She smiled, her fingers brushing against his. "Then let us never forget how we got here." He nodded. "We will not. We earned this." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and slow, blanketing the gardens in white. Inside, warmth filled every corner, not from the fire alone, but from the quiet, enduring love that had turned two broken lives into one whole beginning. Winter came gently that year, wrapping the Hayes estate in quiet white. Snow lay soft on the rooftops, and the trees stood still beneath the pale sky. Inside the mansion, the fireplace glowed warmly, its light dancing across the walls that once held shadows. Adrian Hayes sat by the fire, reading through the year's final foundation report. The numbers told a story of growth, new hospitals, scholarships, and communities rebuilt. It was everything he had once dreamed of creating. But the success felt meaningful now only because of the woman sitting beside him. Lily Hayes was sketching in her journal, her eyes bright with calm contentment. When she noticed him watching, she smiled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. He closed the report and reached for her hand. "About how far we have come. About how none of this would exist without you." She shook her head gently. "Without us," she corrected. "We saved each other." For a moment, silence filled the room, peaceful, complete. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, whispering through the snow. Inside, everything was warm and still. Adrian rose and walked to the window, looking out at the glowing path that led to the greenhouse. "Do you realize," he said quietly, "that it all began with something that was never supposed to be real?" Lily stood beside him, her voice tender. "Maybe that is what made it real. We fought for it." He smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "Then let this be our forever." And as the snow fell softly over the Hayes estate, their story born from lies, healed by truth, and strengthened by love finally found its peace.